You're listening to On Shifting Ground. I'm Ray Suarez. If you're lucky enough to have ever walked into a bakery in France in the morning and walked out with a baguette, you know how wonderful the results can be. The crunch, the soft, chewy core, add some butter or jam, some ham and cheese, and you encounter a little bit of heaven. Or as the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, would call it, 250 grams of magic and perfection in our daily lives. But many of us would be surprised to learn the very best baguette in the nation's capital isn't always made by what's referred to as a Français de souche, or native-born French person.
Ah oui, comme il m'appelait le maire de Paris. Il m'a dit, Monsieur Kader, vous avez lu...
When the mayor of Paris called me, he said, Mr. Kader, you have the best baguette in France. I couldn't believe it, but at the end of the day, I'm proud because for the past 8 years, my baguette has been served at the president's table.
Regardez, elle est parfaite.
For the past 30 years, bakers across Paris have gone head-to-head at the city's annual baguette competition, all in the hopes of snagging the coveted title of Best Baguette. And since 2008, an increasing number of the competition's winners have boasted last names and family origins that extend far beyond France's borders.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Rida Kader.
My name is Rida Kader. I left Tunisia when I was 15 years old to become an apprentice with my brother.
Rida Kader left his family's farm in Tunisia to join his older brother in the land of liberté, égalité, and fraternité. And using the skills and the love for kneading and shaping dough that he first picked up in his mother's kitchen, he went on to master a craft that remains key to French identity.
Moi, je voulais venir pour une vacances.
I just wanted a vacation. Sadly, my parents pushed me to stay to become an apprentice and learn how to bake. They told me that having a future in bread, having a future in baking, was a noble profession, and essentially forced me to stay in France.
Rida is part of a burgeoning community of Maghrebi, North African immigrants, who, motivated by the steadfast belief that success is earned through sheer dedication and hard work, have stepped up to man the ovens and breathe life back into France's bread industry. There are many reasons why, but perhaps it's because manual jobs are still seen as demanding and demeaning to France's youth.
50% des boulangeries, c'est tenu par
50% of bakers are owned by Tunisians and others from the Maghreb. Why? Because it's not an easy job. You work 12 hours a day, it's hard work. Nowadays, if a French bakery is up for sale, a Maghrebi will purchase it because we are up for hard work. We know better. We know that we've come to France to work, to succeed.
But even though Rida found success in his adopted country, thanks to this iconic product, to many he's still considered French of papers, not French of the heart. And as far-right ideas of Francocide and the replacement of Europe's white majority with Muslim people of color gain ground, the question of who is French and who is not is once again dominating French politics, leaving the country's roughly 7 million immigrants to wonder just what it'll take to finally be considered French first.
Moi, j'ai toujours dit,
I'll say this, when an immigrant comes to France, there is work. If they work, they can succeed. I call on all immigrants to integrate through hard work. That's very important.
pain, c'est connu sur le français.
The French know their bread, so I thought maybe, as a Tunisian, I'm not at that level to make the best baguette in France. But what a success. That's what makes me so proud. And this, of course, is thanks to hard work. Today, although I've left my mother in Tunisia, France has opened her arms to me.
Voilà, c'est le drapeau bleu, blanc, rouge. La République.
Rida's story is inspiring because it hints at a colorblind society of acceptance. But France is seeing the emergence of a new far right, and French mayors are facing death threats and arson attacks over immigration. It's almost as if learning the language, succeeding professionally, or being recognized by the highest officials in the land just isn't enough for immigrants to become French. Joining me to speak of baguettes and Frenchness is Reem Sarah Alouane. Reem Sarah Alouane is a French legal scholar, a PhD candidate in comparative law at the University Toulouse-Capiteau in France. Her research focuses on civil liberties, constitutional law, and human rights across France, Europe, and North America. Welcome to On Shifting Ground.
Hi, thank you for having me.
UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Social, and Cultural Organization, has proclaimed the baguette a piece of the world's intangible cultural assets. And, it sounds kind of cute, but it really is kind of a pillar of daily life, isn't it? Not an exaggeration.
Oh, it's not. The cliche is real, if I may say. It's really part of our culture, of our diet. It's a historical symbol as well when you look throughout history. It's really part of our daily lives. When we are young, the first thing we learn how to do is to go to the bakery to buy a baguette. I remember the first time I bought a baguette, I was so proud of myself and learning how to count, changes and being able to do it by yourself. When I travel abroad, I adapt myself very easily to other cultures, but I miss my baguette. I go to the US, I'm still trying to find a place where I can find some decent baguettes, or any other country. So it's really part of our way of life and culture and pride as well.
Across wealthy countries, wealthy industrialized countries, there have been a lot of emotional debates about immigration, what immigration means to a country's sense of itself. Of course, that conversation is different in the United States, in Canada, in Germany, in Britain. But as much as, maybe more than any wealthy country, the French have argued a lot about Frenchness, about identity, about what's French and what's not. Has modern France felt itself in danger of losing small artisanal industries like the neighborhood bakeries that sell baguettes?
The question of Frenchness, and I would say, what does it mean to be French? An ongoing question across the political spectrum, really, it's both on the left and the right, has indeed brought conversation about the current state of our nation regarding diversity and regarding immigration as a whole. And I think that France has failed to take into account its diversity in a sense that diversity is not a threat to the survival of France, whatever that means, but actually it is a privilege. It's something that should be celebrated because diversity makes France better. And I'm not trying to be cute or stereotype, but if you take indeed bakeries, right, or any other artisanal shops as a whole, many French people born and raised here are ignoring these jobs, are not getting into these jobs, don't want to be trained for this job for various reasons. And we have to admit that immigrants are interested into this job because usually that's the first job they find. Or since bakers can't find trainees, those interns of immigrant background or who are immigrants go be trained, and they're saving those small artisanal jobs and shops. So it's a plus, but unfortunately, the weaponization of this debate has taken over, and this is not going well on a political level, even though in real life, for France, it's actually working.
France gives an annual award to the best baguettes in the country. The most recent winner is from Sri Lanka. One of the judges in the contest said that most of the winning bakers have last names and family origins from outside France. Does that punch your ticket? If you can show that you have mastered a French art form, is that sufficient? Are people willing to accept your bona fides at that point and say, yeah, you're French, that's good enough for me?
Of course, this man is brilliant and deserved absolutely to be celebrated. But in my opinion, it is a multifaceted discussion. He's basically being, and rightly so, right, celebrated for passing the French test. And he mastered the art of being French by baking what is quintessentially French. But it's also, what does it mean to be French? And this is the changing face of France. Immigrants are embracing France and its culture, but will they be embraced back? And my issue with that is how often immigrants have to prove they are worth it and to prove they excel to be able to be not necessarily accepted, but tolerated. Because my question to you is, what if one day this extremely gifted gentleman have a bad day and make a bad batch of baguettes? What the response will be? What if one day he makes a mistake? I'm going to quote a French football player born and raised in France, Karim Benzema, who is a French of Algerian background. His family is from Algeria, but he was born and raised here, who declared a couple of years ago, if I score, I am French. If I don't, or if there are problems, I'm Arab. And actually, that's my question. Why don't we treat immigrants only when they prove they are worth living here or being part of this country, instead of just considering them as humans with their flaws and with their success and their abilities? And some are willing to risk their lives. A couple of years ago, Sam, an Malian undocumented man, saved a kid's life by climbing a building. I don't know if you remember it. He risked his life and he was granted the French citizenship, right? But my question is, do immigrants have to risk their lives to be able to be considered French or worth sharing our culture and society? Or should we just consider them with empathy and humanity?
Well, it's fascinating to watch from here because we're having our own family fights about immigration in this country. And I was in France last year, and you don't have to look very hard to see people whose origins are from outside France in all kinds of job descriptions. And there is a version of Frenchness that says, well, once you accept our values and learn our language and play by our rules, you're in. But I wonder whether people really mean that. When you listen to the tone and the tenor of recent political campaigns, how well the Le Pens have done, how they've moved from the fringes of French politics to the heart of the national conversation, whether French really believe that, or whether the darkness of your skin or your hair or your eyes will mark you, whether a family name will mark you 3 and 4 and 5 generations down the road. Can you ever be French enough?
That's a very good question, and I think you touch the very issue here. Until when enough is enough to be French, I think that France is a country in denial. We are a quote-unquote colorblind nation. We don't see race. We don't see origins. We are a unitary country. There are only French people. If you say the M word, multiculturalism, it's a bad word. Literally, the response you will have, we are not America. Look at America. The country is like a ghetto, quote unquote. It's divided and nobody talk to each other. It's not a real country. We are not multicultural. We are France. But in reality, yes, we do see race when we have racial profiling performed by the police. I'm not the one saying that. Our human rights ombudsman say it. When you see police brutality, a recent report was released saying that students with a name that sounds African or Arab has less chances when apply for a master at university to get a response than someone with a white French sounding name. Or regarding access to social housing or housing in general, like a black man or a man of North African origins or women will have more difficulties to have an apartment, for example, than someone who is white. I'm not even talking about the treatment of Muslims, which I think have been debated a lot. But yes, the discrimination are quite intense and so on and so forth. And I think if we do not accept the fact that we do have a racist problem in this country, that the far-right ideology is now mainstreamed. From the fringe today, it's the general discourse, including from traditional parties, both on the right and the left. So for someone of immigrant background, whose family is of immigrant background, you always have to prove your Frenchness. And at some point, it's draining, and at some point, people give up. Many French people of immigrant background are now leaving the country to countries, especially the US, Canada, the UK, even the UK, Germany, etc. And that's something we still refuse to face. And I think that's a huge shame because, again, France has always been a diverse country. But the debate has been weaponized. Politicians are trying to preserve a sort of French homogeneity. And at the same time, those who ask for progress to tackle those issues are being called separatists or, quote unquote, because that's trendy, woke. So we imported that reactionary debate in France, and unfortunately it has impacted academia as well and people working on those issues. So I think we are in a shifting time in France, and it's going to take a long time for things to get better, that's for sure.
You're listening to On Shifting Ground, produced by World Affairs in San Francisco. Our guest is French legal scholar Rim Sarah Alouane. We're talking about what it takes to be considered French enough. A lot of this, there's a different version of it in Britain, but there is an almost quaint surprise after a country has gone out into the rest of the world and taken what it's wanted for centuries, that there wouldn't be people from those places who end up in your country. It's, okay, we let go of all those colonies. Who are these people from North Africa, from West Africa, from Southeast Asia? I am always surprised at the surprise.
Well, I think that's a bit the history of the colonizer, right? You know, it's the cycle of history. If you take France, the history of immigration, I mean, of course, date for a long time, but the post-colonization immigration is something very unique. We needed immigration to rebuild the country, especially after World War II and beyond. Immigrants built France. Let's be blunt about it. They built France. They are doing the job that nobody wants. And by the way, I think it's extremely wrong to just talk about the economic use of immigrants. They are more than people who should do job than that no other people want. And that's very interesting because currently the French government is going to submit for debate a new law on immigration, which is most likely going to be even more restricted than the previous one. One of the points that is going to be debated is to give residency to immigrants who do jobs that nobody wants. And my question is, what about the others? And yet, we have cases of doctors who are being under the threat of being deported because we don't need them anymore. Even though immigrant doctors literally saved France during COVID, the public service of hospitals will not be able to survive without the doctors that we don't even pay as doctors because they are immigrants. Like you said, I'm always surprised as well of the surprise. But guess what? We live in a globalized world where people connect with each other, you know, travel across borders. And it's really funny that usually we say that about immigrants from the quote unquote global south, but not only talk about Americans who decide to leave the US because they don't like the current political situation in the country. It's expatriation, I guess. It's not immigration. We don't talk about the Brits who decide to go apply for some EU citizenship or EU residency because Brexit. How is that different from someone from, I don't know, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Senegal, who wants to find a better place to live or more opportunities? Again, I'm not saying we should not have a debate on immigration, but let's have a debate that is also full of empathy and sanity as well.
All right, well, let me take up that challenge then. And instead of channeling Marine Le Pen, look at a guy like Rida Khader, a North African immigrant from Tunisia, took the crown for best baguette baker in Paris. Isn't that kind of a triumph? Isn't that kind of a flattering moment where you think the attraction of my country and the attraction of my culture is such that people from other places in the world not only want to share it with me, but want to master aspects of it? This shows what a great country I've got here.
In theory, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to give you another example, like everyday life in France. If you look at, for example, little shops owned by usually people of North African background, for example, halal butchers, okay? You will have the classics products from the Maghreb region, for example. But guess what? You also have baguettes. And you also have French cheese that you can also buy and other kind of items. This is what France is. It's complicated, it's messy, it's full of talented people. And being French is more, I think, that the holy trinity of baguette beret and cheese. It's also couscous. Fun fact, did you know that couscous is one of the top 5 favorite dish of French people? Couscous became French somehow.
And yet there are tension moments when France plays Morocco or plays Algeria in an international match. So for those of you who don't follow soccer, football, the best French nationals who play for club sides across the country come together as a national team and play their equivalents, often people who they play alongside on their regular professional teams, who then end up playing for their North African home country teams. These are very closely watched matches, but also, it seems to me, French people look for an opportunity to be upset when French people of Moroccan or Algerian descent fly a flag or root for the other team or go to a bar and cheer with other people from their country. Similar things happen when the Mexican soccer team comes to Southern California and plays the LA Galaxy or plays a friendly away against the United States, and people get upset because people in the stands fly Mexican flags. It's a moment that they are unwilling. You talked about empathy before. They're unwilling to extend a certain kind of empathy or understanding. And many of these are the same people who are happy to see the St. Patrick's Day parade flying Irish flags or the Columbus Day parade flying Italian flags and on and on and on, but very upset to see those Mexican flags in the stands. Whenever those kinds of things happen in France, I get a kick out of it because I see emanations of it, I see echoes of it here in my own country.
That's a perfect example. And actually, the US and France have more in common than we think. And just before touching on this one, if we come back to food for one little second, often, we love kebab and couscous, but we don't like you as a person because you're not real French. Same in the US, we absolutely love tacos and migas, but we don't like Mexicans. But we keep the food. So it's quite disturbing to see like this mental gymnastic that actually both are not mutually exclusive. And without immigrants, you cannot have tacos and couscous and whatsoever. To come back to this one, the example of football games, I think, are very telling. I remember really when France played Morocco, all the horrors you would hear from pundits and even some usually serious analysts that you are a traitor to the nation if you don't support the French team. And yet, are we saying that to French Portuguese or French Spanish who, use a Portuguese or Spanish flag to support the national team? And I think that's also a proof, in my opinion, to try to be optimistic, that this generation of reactionary who cannot grasp with the fact that their world is over. Today, we are a world of multiculturalism, of connection. You can perfectly be both. Be proud of the country of your grandparents, to honor it, and also be proud of the country that is raising you, where you were born into. The same people who were supporting Morocco, the next round were really supporting France.
We've skirted around religion, and I want to make sure we touch on it before we end our talk, because there's a very different history in the attitudes toward religion, culturally, politically, socially, in France and the United States. Laïcité is held up as a model, as an aspiration, as an ideal. Disinterestedness, neutrality when it comes to religion. And yet, there is a residual idea that a real Frenchman is, at least by heritage, Catholic, if not actually a practicing person who goes to Mass and takes communion. And that, conversely, someone who is a professing, practicing Muslim is somehow not French. And I wonder if that can work itself out in a way that has integrity, that has decency. As you look down the road, are we seeing, certainly among younger French people, a different kind of idea about what the future could look like?
Absolutely, and I'm glad that you mentioned this. That's first and foremost because laïcité has been weaponized. In the United States, you have the First Amendment. For me, the United States is a laic country as well, except that you don't perceive the relation between church and state the same way we do. In the US, you protect the people against the abuses of the state in matters of religious freedom because of your history, right? So it's really from bottom to top in matter of protection. In France, because of our history, especially with the Roman Catholic Church, the state has to be protected against the potential abuses of religion. And that's how we have this notion of laïcité. And the idea in 1905, when the law on separation of church and state was adopted, the idea really was that the state is neutral, not the people. So you protect freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, to believe, to not believe, to change religion. That was pretty easy. And of course, I'm really summarizing like more than 100 years of history. So pardon me if I'm simplifying things.
It's doing it very quickly. Okay.
Very quickly. It has been more than, especially post-colonization, more than 30 years since now we are trying to make the people neutral. And we are trying to target the visibility of religion in the public space, especially regarding Muslims. And that's why we have all of these laws being adopted, but first and foremost, it was to target Muslims. And again, this is not sustainable at all, because we have people indeed who practice a certain religion that is still perceived a threat to the security of the country, to the fabric of the country, even if Muslims have been part of France for decades.
As someone of North African heritage, are you fully, unequivocally French, or are you French with an asterisk, French with caveats?
I am a 50 shades of Frenchness. I'm team cheese, I'm team couscous, I'm team baklawas, and I'm team millefeuille. I am a Mediterranean. I heart both sides of the Mediterranean. I belong to France, I belong to the Mediterranean, and I have no problem with that. I navigate through it like a boat. I have my compass, I know where I'm going, and I think that I'm not the only one. Some people probably need to take lessons from immigrants or people of immigrants' background, because I think it will make them better French.
Rim Sarah Alouane is a French legal scholar. Her research focuses on civil liberties, constitutional law, and human rights across France, Europe, and North America. Great to have you with us on Shifting Ground.
Merci. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to On Shifting Ground, produced in partnership with KQED, with funding from listeners like you. Today's episode was produced by Sienna Barnes, Matteo Schimpf, Elise Manukian, and Andrew Stelzer. Our intern is Adam Ailey. It was mixed and mastered by Matteo Schimpf. Additional production and engineering were provided by Rob Spate. KQED's Jim Bennett is our technical supervisor. Jared Spord is our executive producer. Philip Yun is CEO of World Affairs. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ray Suarez. Thanks for listening.